Hey everyone, Rob here. First of all, I just want to thank you for listening and supporting Diabetics Doing Things. We are going on 8 years of recording these podcasts and approaching 350 episodes on this feed extremely quickly. So, your support means everything. We would not be here without you. Just wanted to call your attention to a few things that we're working on lately that are updates to Diabetics Doing Things. The first is we are throwing events. And you can find more about our events at diabeticsdoingthings.com/events. We launched our first event in April of 2023. It was a coffee house roastery tour and latte art class. And we have two very exciting events coming up in the fall of 2023, including our first ever, so our inaugural National Diabetes Awareness Month event. And those are going to be on diabeticsdoingthings.com/events this month. So be sure to check those out. Also, if you have a question that you want Eritrea and I to answer on air, please email the mailbag at diabeticsdoingthings.com. So that's mailbag at diabeticsdoingthings.com. Your question will be answered on air during a special episode of the Rob and Eritrea show. So if you want to ask us a burning question and you want us to spend some time on it, please reach out to mailbag at diabeticsdoingthings.com. All right, let's get to the episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Diabetics Doing Things. We are telling the amazing stories of people living with diabetes all over the world. And today we're going to the big city to meet our very special guest, Mr. Nick Callas on Instagram. It's Nick Callas himself. Welcome to the show.
What's up?
Well, I love it, man. Thank you for taking the time today. And we were kind of just chatting off here. Man, love seeing your comedy, love seeing your bits online. It's just fun to meet people with diabetes doing creative outputs and making people laugh, and very excited to kind of dig into your story and kind of talk about your life with diabetes. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll kind of start where we start normally, which is like, when did you join this type 1 diabetes sort of multi-conglomerate, the family?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for such a lovely intro. My name is Nick Callas. I am a stand-up comedian. I'm 30 years old, and I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was 6 years old, growing up in Bergen County, New Jersey. Yeah.
Shout out. Big shout out, Bergen County. So what do you remember? I mean, like 6 years old, you probably don't remember life as much before diabetes. Like, what do you remember about like adjusting to that, like diagnosis, and, anything with family, or, what stands out to you from like the early days?
Yeah, I have a few pretty core memories about pre and post diagnosis. Generally, and I think, and not to get too deep off top, but I think like generally as a kid, I was extremely quiet, scared actually, and very insecure, and and I would say I just didn't have a good sense of anything and felt uneasy. I didn't know the rules to games and stuff. I think like most
Yes.
kids don't, sports and stuff like it. So I was very intimidated by a lot of things. And I also had tremendous separation anxiety from my mom. And I think around that time my parents had gotten divorced too. So I had all these different factors that made me feel like quite isolated. And then here comes diabetes, which actually exacerbated just about all of those things. Because now I had a medical reason that I needed to be by my mom's side, because it was, of course, a number of years before I could really handle myself as a diabetic. And so yeah, so there was this diagnosis that I remember going to the doctor office, and for well, it must have been a few weeks prior, I was just chugging water before I'd go to bed, and then peeing in the same, in the same 10 seconds. I would just drink water and pee and drink water and pee, and couldn't go to bed. And I remember this distinct moment where my older brother, who's 5 years older, we're sitting in my parents' bedroom, and he goes, "You're gonna have to keep peeing if you keep drinking water." And I was like, "I know, but if I feel like I need to." And I said that to him. I was like, "I feel like I need to." And, I just had some outrageously high blood sugar at the time. And, my mom was like, all right, something's up with this kid. And at this point, we had no diabetes in the family. We've actually been a few people since who have, developed it. And I think we learned through me that a number of people in my family, especially on my dad's side, had an antibody like predisposition for it. But so go to the doctor, what seems like a normal checkup, uh, leads to me like a number of hours later waking up in the hospital. I guess I'd fallen asleep at some point. And then all of a sudden there are just all these Dragon Ball Z toys surrounding me and balloons and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best day ever. But why am I in the hospital? And so my mom and a doctor came and sat down with me and like explained what was going on. And I had no idea. I don't think I'd ever even heard of diabetes before. And my family was there and they kind of explained to me that this was going to be like this big journey and this was a big deal. But it didn't connect with me. It didn't connect with me at all. I just was like excited that people were around and paying attention to me and also I couldn't conceptualize like the change that was going to happen in my life. And once I started to, over the next couple days, started to realize, oh, I have to take insulin shots and I have to check my blood sugar. And I think as a kid too, there's a big obsession about needles, like needles. This must have been 1998. Like needles are going to be such a big part of your life now as a 6-year-old. And I remember making a choice to like never let him see you sweat. Because as a kid, I felt so ostracized and so bizarre already that having like a real reason now to be in need of help or attention for anything other than like, being cool felt terrible. So I remember
Mm.
making a choice that like no matter how much this sucks, don't let them know you feel that way. Especially because my older brother and my father were such tough guys. And one of the first things anybody had said to me sitting in the hospital was, "You're a trooper." I remember somebody saying, "You're a trooper," and it felt good to hear that. And so I just never let go of it. And most certainly, I did lapse at times and probably like complain about having to, take an insulin injection or not get to eat cake at something. But for the most part, that was like kind of my mantra. It was just like deal with this. And I think that was a huge part of like developing a sense of maturity and a sense of self and growth and like being able to cope with things. Cause like God knows there have been much more challenging things in my life since then than to have diabetes, but it did give me a sort of like bedrock foundation to like process everything through after that.
It's such an interesting perspective because to be 6 years old and like really digging into, oh, I want to be a trooper. I want to be a tough guy. I want to be able to handle this and not let people see me sweat or not be sort of othered. We were talking about that before we started recording too, that when you're young, you just don't want anyone to see something different about you because they'll point it out and you're not comfortable with who you are yet. And because you're young and you're still growing. I kind of felt the same way. I was just like, I've come to accept it more as I get older. And like the passage of time, like certainly opens us up as we get older and like more mature and really, recognize why we do some of the things that we do. But to me, like some of it is survival too, because you're early on, you're just trying to, get through it and say, hey, like I can do this. I can still be myself even with this diabetes. And I think for me too, like I was older and like 16, but like even the pressure to fit in at those ages, especially early on, is so great that you're afraid to acknowledge these little details or these things that make you not fit in. Did you feel that like ever, like as you kind of
Yeah,
like a little bit older?
constantly. And I think I'm very lucky actually in that some of the things that have been like challenges for me are things that elicit a level of self-awareness and discipline that I think most people just won't encounter. And by that I mean I do stand-up comedy. The most important element for me about comedy developing it off stage and then also performing and dealing with it in the moment is self-awareness. You need to be extremely aware of yourself and aware of your surroundings, obviously, in a show in order to do the job and to perform and to make people laugh. And then also diabetes is a very physical, quite literal version of self-awareness. And then also humility with both of those things. Like you have to be humble and you have to know that, okay, in a literal sense of diabetes, I can't eat this right now. Or if I want to eat this later, I have to do this, that, and the third. And with stand up, the same thing is true is that you have to, you have to be aware of yourself and your obligation has to be to other people's good time. And so you have to be very aware of how you're behaving and how you're coming across. And so I have all these things in my life that are sort of like metrics of my sense about myself. And so it's like a blessing and a curse, right? Because it sucks to have to think about what you're doing and how you're coming across all the time, but also it keeps you in line and it forces you to be more aligned with like your asonic identity, right? Like your who you're trying to be in the world. So there's that, but that took a long time to develop in the early stages of like being a diabetic kid. It's mostly just insecurity and feeling vulnerable. And even to this day, I've noticed, I'm sure you guys have had this experience where like you're watching TV or something and a commercial for diabetes will come on and maybe no one looks at you, but there's this feeling that people are looking at you now or that you're being talked about, or if diabetes ever came up in health class, like all of a sudden you feel looked at. Maybe you are like because it's weird. And there's always maybe a couple diabetic kids in school. So it is this like lantern that's hanging on you. And even to this day, it's this bizarre trigger where if I hear the word diabetes out on the street or on TV I'm passing or something, my ear will involuntarily just perk up. It actually happens to me. And it's again, it's like I'm sure other people have them for other reasons. Maybe if you're not very tall or you're very tall, you hear somebody talk about height or something, and then it just kind of grabs your attention. There's all these like weird little things. So
It's kind of like when when you're in a crowd of people and you hear someone say your name, like you just hear it so much more clearly. And for me and diabetes
oh,
too, I don't know if you've ever worn an insulin pump in your life with diabetes. We can talk about devices and stuff later, but the OG Medtronic pump had this like beep cadence that was really specific. And now whenever I'm in a room, if I hear it, I can hear it across the airport. It's just like because it's just so dialed into like my brain to hear it, even though my pump doesn't make that same noise anymore. So it's so weird, like those different like kind of ingrained in your brain like become part of you to listen and take note of those like various, whether it's diabetes or it's your name or, a device beep.
yeah, it's different reasons to make you aware of yourself in a way that makes you feel insecure. And like we said, growing up as a kid, you have a million of those already. And if you're embarrassed about something as a kid, you can hide it or lie. That's a lot of being a kid is going, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, or I don't have a crush on her. But diabetes, everybody knows you have it. And it is this thing where it makes you feel I don't want to project anybody else's experience, but like as a kid, I felt broken in some ways. I was like, I can't physically, I'm not the same as these other kids on a biological level, right? And so I felt weakened by that. And especially playing sports, if I had to sit out a gym class or something like that, I did feel I my experience was that I felt handicapped. And then when that combines with like your social identity, it can be awful. I mean, also kids are vicious and they don't
Tough.
know. And they don't know and they don't know how they're I mean, to this day, I'm a comedian. I go on stage and sometimes I say something that later on I'm like, that might have been not funny in the way that I thought it was gonna be or it was hurtful. It happens to me all the time, but kids are even worse with that. And there was a kid who came up to me one day and she'd said she'd said, "Hey, don't you have AIDS?" And shout out to the AIDS community. There's nothing wrong with having AIDS either. Doesn't change who you are. But as a kid, there's plenty of stigma around that. And we're in 4th grade, mind you. So it was just like, I because here's the thing. Here's the brilliance of this comment is that I didn't have AIDS. And so I had to correct her with my real disease. So it's also embarrassing in that way. Because I couldn't be, I don't know what you're talking about. But it
As
did.
a kid, it's embarrassing, but as an adult, we call that a read. Anyway, no, I love so first of all, I don't think you're projecting when you say you felt broken. In our last episode, we literally did an episode that came out today of the Robin Eritrea show where I was talking to my dad and I was like, I feel broken. Like, I feel like you guys don't want me anymore because I'm not that perfect kid. So I think a lot of us do go through that sentiment of just like, what's wrong with me? And then just to like double down on these elementary school trauma stories, I remember going to lunch because like I'd have to leave early to go test for lunch. And the first time I had to do it, this one kid raised his hand and he was like, Miss, what's wrong with her? Like, what is there something? You know what I mean? So it's just like kids are mean. That's just how it runs. And if you're a kid and you're listening to this, first of all, I'm sorry, but also it's going to get better. But that does prompt the question that I wanted to ask you. So I want to go further back. When you first got diagnosed, you said that you had like already a form of separation anxiety from your mom. And a lot of the people who listen to our podcast are parents of kids with diabetes. Did your diagnosis impact that relationship further with your mom? Like, did it make it hard for her or was it just hard for you?
Yeah. I'll admit it's so hard for her because, my mom she's pretty young when she got married and pretty young when she started having kids. She's not a nurse, but she'll be the first person to tell you now that she's had a crash course and everything in it, and now is a nurse and a doctor and a pilot and an astronaut and all these things. That's what being a mom is, right? You just suddenly got to be all these things. But yeah, I mean, my mom could be an endo, and that's the thing. And I've said this to people before: is that the thing about having diabetes that is unlike a lot of other things that you could have is that you have to be an endo. If you're diabetic and you manage your diabetes well, if you're just baseline healthy, it means you're capable of all the things that an endo is capable of. And you know all those things because that's how much you have to be on top of it. It isn't, I don't want to make comparisons and put myself out of school here, but like in general, a lot of ailments that might even be life-threatening are things that only a doctor can do for you, be it with medication or devices or just, frequent checkups. But diabetes, you walk around with it all day. Every time you eat, every time you're active, you have to be able to like treat yourself. And so you have to know what you're doing. It's not like something that you can be diagnosed with that you'll just go, okay, I'll deal with it today. And then I have an appointment in 6 months. Like you're really with you all the time. So again, that's the kind of thing that I hated as a child because it was, one, mortifying, and two, preoccupying in a physical health sense. I had an aide that would sit in the back of the class for at least a few years when I was in middle school. She was like a ghost or a shadow that just sat in the back of the class. A lovely woman, but it didn't make a difference. She sat in the back of the class and she would just check my blood sugar every couple of hours and before lunch. And by the way, it's not like I could only see her. You know what I mean? The whole class has this lady there.
They had to
It's
ask
hard.
her, what is she doing here? It's like,
Nick's
yeah,
handler. It's Nick's
seriously.
handler. Yeah. Like,
It was like an awful version of being like a rich kid or something. I just had this like Alfred behind me.
in retrospect, though, I would kill to have a lady in the back of my life just walking around asking me about my blood sugars.
Oh
That
my
was
God. Now
awesome.
I'm
Can
just
you
trying to
imagine?
make it in comedy to the point where I can hire somebody to do that. But at the time, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you didn't know how good you had it at the time. It's like, and it was embarrassing. Now I'd kill for a lady to follow me around and
Oh my
like,
God.
God.
Yeah. She doesn't even have to do anything for my diabetes. If a lady would follow me around in my life, it'd be a very good thing.
Yeah, just have her around. Just good to bounce ideas off of. I'm gonna make sure I'm not doing her. I'm living right. Hey, can we get a calibration here on decision making? Great stuff.
You've got one of those, Rob. But anyways,
I mean, I have a wife. She's not my employee. I don't claim her as a dependent. I think It is interesting though. And I want to kind of talk about, because you've mentioned kind of Alfred, you mentioned like discipline and like the burden of kind of like living with diabetes, like chronically and it just reminded me like any day, it could be today, for example. Eritrea and I, before you came on, we're just talking about like last night she had an urgent low, and I forgot to, I got out of the shower and I forgot to turn my basal insulin back on my pump. So I woke up at 3 a.m. with my blood sugar in the 300. So like just in average everyday life, like day to day, you have like a life threatening experience and sometimes like near death. And you just like eat some candy and stand up and we're like, okay, well, we're good now. Time to just get back to what we were doing before.
Yeah. No, I'll plug my charger in while I answer this question, just because I don't want it to die, honest.
Yeah.
And they're the running to get the charger. Like man, I'm the
I love
queen
it.
of my stomach. The queen of my pump and my phone not being charged is me. Where is my crown?
I mean, it's a constant thing for me. And again, I'm like blessed and cursed with a vocation and a career that forces me to have to be more on top of it than frankly I care to be, because I can't, none of us want to fucking, can we curse? Sorry. No, none of us want to do anything. I can't even think when my blood sugar is high. If my blood sugar is 300, bury me at the beach. I don't even want to be around. It's the worst. I can't. And when you're low, the only thing you can even think to do is to just fill yourself with food. And so part of that is like making that as convenient for yourself as possible, trying to like live within the bounds of like when you might be high or low. But because I perform at night every night, I have to at least be like golden from 5 o'clock till whenever I go to sleep. Because if my blood sugar's high or low at all near when I'm going to perform, I just can't do it. Maybe some comedians could, but the nature of my stand-up is extremely emotional. It's very physical. It's too taxing to not be at a 140 blood sugar. I can't do it otherwise. And then there's a huge emotional toll. I don't know if you guys experience this, but often guilt if my blood sugar is not good. I feel really crappy about myself for not taking
Dude,
care of myself.
I have to remind myself regularly during low blood sugars that it's just the low blood sugar talking. Like that emotional swing is like part of the clinical response. You know, it's like your body is just, hey, like we're not good. And by the way, if you didn't feel bad enough, like here's some really bad feelings to just tide you over for
Here
the
are all
next
these
hour.
thoughts about how it's your fault. Like,
Yeah.
oh my,
Yeah, and it's
we have
like,
to. What is it,
oh,
Rob? You said, love yourself through the low. Isn't that something
you do, but you just also have to remember that like it's just a low blood sugar. It's like, am I worthy of life? And it's like, oh yes, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
it's just a low blood sugar telling me that I'm a piece of shit. Like so, or that hey, and I talk to people a lot about exercise, and people without diabetes have a lot of excuses to not exercise, and like it's really easy to guilt yourself. You get to the gym, you got your outfit on, you're good doing your sets, and all of a sudden your blood sugar tanks. It's really easy to beat yourself up for that. But you just gotta like, hey, remember, like, all right, this is just the diabetes. Like I live with diabetes, and negative feelings and like emotional swings are part of high and low blood sugars. That's why we feel better when our blood sugars are in range. That's why you don't feel comfortable, performing when your blood sugar's out of range. It's why I could look at every basketball game I've ever played and I could tell you whether my blood sugar was in range or not based on the games that I played. Good, I was great.
Totally. And
But the ones not, I was out of range.
and I'm sure all of us have too much pride to ever, maybe with the exception of like a brother or sister or a parent or something. If I had a bad set, if I didn't like a performance of mine, Batman himself could not get out of me that, well, my blood sugar wasn't good. I could never cop to that. I would internally, I would go, dude, you got to take care of yourself because of this, that, and the third. But I would never share that with someone because and this goes back to the childhood diagnosis thing, is like, I don't want to be anybody else's obligation, anybody else's problem. I don't want to be seen that way. And while there is like a sort of middle ground where you have to be real with yourself for your own health and safety, and people should be aware of what's going on with you, it is actually a character fortification to take all that on the chin and go like, this is my burden and this is my problem, because it really does make you better. And one of the things I kind of want to like transition this conversation into is like a bit of unsolicited advice, because some of the things that diabetes has really helped me with is confidence and physical health. Because all the things that we're talking about now have forced me to be more aware of what I eat and how I eat and how I feel. And by that I mean that, we all can read a nutrition label just secondhand, and we can all eyeball things and have a pretty accurate guess of the carbs and whether or not it's a solid protein source and what type of carbs. Is that going to hold me over, or is that going to spike me and then I'll crash? What is that going to do to me? That helped me really learn how to count calories and macronutrients really quickly. Like, it was a second language to me. And then that combined with like weight training and stuff that I started doing has like put me in the best shape of my life. And I'm much healthier, dare I say, than my two non-diabetic brothers, because I have this like other language that I speak that is, nutrition.
I think that's something that's really interesting, because you're not the first person who has said that on the podcast. In fact, there's a guy who like literally wrote the book on diabetic bodybuilding and building muscle with diabetes. He came on the podcast, 5 or 6 years ago, and was like, before I got diabetes, that, I think he was 17 or 18 when he was diagnosed. Like he's like, I didn't have good nutrition habits. I didn't care about athletics or lifting weights. And because of diabetes, I was given this kind of insight into what's happening inside my body. And I think for you, like when you're talking about like being physically fit and like seeing the results of that in your diabetes, like it just feeds that sort of like dopamine in your brain that you're like doing something good for yourself. And it's like, and now not
That's
only do I
awesome.
know like, hey, I look and feel good, but I also can look at my diabetes and like directly connect that to like good choices that I'm making. And I think that compounds. Like it really is like, and I think everybody has their own like time when they're able to like connect those things, and it is difficult, but like with diabetes is difficult and it is long. And I'm a huge believer in just like incremental progress. You talk a lot about discipline in other interviews that I was reading, preparing for this interview. And, I could tell it's like, hey, I can tell what kind of person with diabetes you are. Like you're very much like be like Eritrea, like where you say like, all right, if I can just eliminate some variables and put myself in a position to succeed, like what I want for myself is on the other side of that. And so I would love to know too, like, you do stand up every day. That is, I think many people who don't know about what it takes to be successful in comedy, like don't realize that like literally every day you're getting up on stage at somewhere at an open mic or, on a performance, you're going on a tour. You're not being, privately, you're not flying private. You don't have a woman following you around with all of your stuff behind. Like, it's a group of people who are like really hustling, going from place to place. And, with travel, with stress, with like staying up late, not sleeping well, like sometimes like not in situations where you can always eat very well. Like, how do you find like the choices to make, or how do you set yourself up for success when you're in that kind of schedule?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you. So for me, it's a confluence of a couple factors that makes it easy and replicable, because that's like the number one thing, right? This has to be a thing that is easy for me to do, that I can do all the time. And the only way those things will happen is if I enjoy doing them. So like what are the foods that I like to eat that are easy to eat and good for me? It's got to fulfill that criteria. And for me, I love peanut butter. I'm obsessed with peanut butter. I literally eat it every single day. And it's very dense in calories. It's very macronutrient dense. It's a great source of fat. It's a good source of protein, and it's a moderate source of carbs, right? So I travel with peanut butter. I travel with apples and bananas usually. And then less often recently, just because my control is tighter, I'll travel with apple juice or orange juice, something it's kind of my like parachute. It's kind of my emergency food. And then I'll have like maybe a protein bar or something in my bag, you know, just in case, something that's like a little bit more dense. But eating healthy, eating sort of near keto, not completely keto. It's kind of impossible for diabetics, in my opinion, to last very long on a keto diet. I also don't think it's a great way to feel energetic, but I digress. If I'm really in tight control and I'm focused on eating meals with a great protein source, then I can travel around to, different states to perform and know that my meals can be assembled pretty quickly just at a 7-Eleven if I need. I'll grab some hard boiled eggs, I'll grab some cold cuts, maybe some cheese, maybe a loaf of bread and peanut butter. And because I'm eating these like pretty standard, like kind of lunch table meals that I can construct myself very quickly, it behooves my like exercise diet and also my diabetes. And those things have become very linked for me.
Well, and I think first of all, I think that your framework is really accessible. Like,
Right.
things that you enjoy, things that are good for you, and like things that are good for your diabetes. Like, I think, and like things that you can repeat, like we are what we repeatedly do. Like, you got to set yourself up for success and kind of eliminate those decisions. And then, like for you, like when you've dialed that in, you mentioned that your control now is like tighter. Like, how did you kind of like, did you self motivate yourself to do that? Did you have this sort of like moment where you're like, if I want to have, if I want to be successful in, comedy or theater or just these creative outputs that you're pursuing and be successful with your diabetes, like this is what I need to do. Like, how did that happen for you?
Yeah, completely. I'm a big proponent of placing the thing that you want most right behind all the things you don't want to do that you should do. For me, I don't want to take care of my diabetes. I want to eat Cheetos puffs and drink Dr. Pepper till I die. That's what I want to do. But more than I want to do that, I want to be the best stand-up comic that I can be. And if I go to perform every night, if I have a less than ideal blood sugar at 7 o'clock, when I'm on stage at 8 o'clock, I can't do the job. And so, everything else falls in line beneath that. Okay. I know that I can't really eat before this soon before the show. And so I have to eat around this time. And for me to be in a sort of stasis place before the show, I've got to eat this way and I've got to make sure I take insulin this long before the meal. And everything just kind of falls in place because there's this other thing that I want more than any negative consequence of like not taking care of myself. And then again, like because I do stand up every day, everything compounds over time. And then a lifestyle is built out of this one choice that I don't have to make now forever. I just have to make it every single day. And if there's a motivator that's big enough to get me to kind of automatically make that decision every day, then the whole year, my whole life is spoken for because there's just this eye on the prize.
I love that. I think a question I ask myself, whether it's in, creative projects or whether it's fitness or whether it's personal life, is like, what am I optimizing for? And it's like, for you, you're optimizing to be the best stand up that you can be. And everything else kind of falls into place as long as you're keeping that front and center. I think this is a good time to transition to talk a little bit about your stand up and like your career. I would just say like multi-talented. You're an actor, you are a stand up, you're a rapper. All of these things like are wrapped in this kind of like very vulnerable, very, accessible and friendly package, which we're experiencing and like kind of deep in a way, like in this interview, but like you're a funny guy. And I think as, somebody sends me your Instagram, and it's like, okay, cool. Well, let's watch these clips. Your set is energetic. You're, big energy, lots of physical comedy. Like where does that, like, where's your inspiration come from? Like, what are you like, how would you pitch yourself? Like somebody who wants to know what your act is about.
Sure. Thanks so much. So let's see. I have always, my whole life as a kid, have always really responded to big, bombastic performances, music, animation. And I think it's because I feel a lot. I think we all do. I think we all feel a lot of stuff. And I think for me, big visuals, big music, big emotions, big performances are a way to reflect that's going on inside in a way that makes it okay to be feeling things like that, whether it's excitement or anger. I was always so drawn to Jim Carrey as a kid because I would see him behave and it just felt appropriate to me. It felt like what I was experiencing. And here was this way that he was, creating these caricatures of moments, be it like excitement or anger or sadness, that was just such a pure distillation of like things I was experiencing. And so I've always been drawn to that. I like extremes in my art. I like fast rap, and I like very physical comedy. And part of that is because I like to know that there's work being done. I like to know that there is an intrinsic challenge or difficulty inherent to the thing that I'm watching. One-liner stand-up is great. It's not my cup of tea because I think a lot of the work takes place off stage. And when I'm an audience member to something, I want to see it being done at a really difficult level. So that's the type of stuff that I try to keep in mind when I'm creating my own things. I want to make people feel like what they're paying to see is worth every dollar. So I always try to put as much of the work into the experience. Yeah.
I love that. And I think too, like you talked about self-awareness earlier, like things that you're experiencing outside, like bringing those into the stage, like feeling the room out. And like, you can see that like in your performance, it's fun to watch. It's like you really do like want to know like what it's like to be in the room. Cause like that really is like a moment you're not going to experience again. Right. I'd love to talk about, because I think people will have questions about this, and nobody ever like angrily messaged me for missing questions, but I'm sure they want to know like how your career as a comedian like works with your diabetes. And like we talk a lot about access on this podcast. We've talked to a lot of different creatives who don't sort of fit the typical 9 to 5, corporate America benefits package type career. And of course, with diabetes, like it's always a challenge. They're like, okay, well, how I got to make sure I can afford my medication and my supplies. So like, what kind of diabetes tech do you wear, and if any? And how does your diabetes kind of manifest itself in your creative career?
So I'm on the Dexcom. This is a G6. I'm 179 right now, guys. So we're okay, but I took a couple of units in. So
Ooh, should we all let's do it. Okay. So
Yeah,
Nick,
I'm
Nick, what was your blood
185 right
sugar?
now.
I was 179. You're 185.
Yeah, we're right dialed in.
I'm 219. I don't want to talk about this. My head's been
We're like all
hurting
within like
today.
30, like 35 units of each
Yeah,
other.
we're
That's
all
wild.
honestly, that's 5 o'clock ish. We've all probably eaten once. There's
Yeah.
a lot of insulin left in the tank.
Yeah, I have 2 units on board. That makes sense.
Yeah, 1.2 on board over here. Yeah, we're doing it. We're going through it, guys. We're having the 5 o'clock the 5 o'clock rundown.
So just
we
the
were talking about-
G6 is
Yeah.
like just what? So your devices are G6. Are you multiple daily injections, or are you on a
Yes, I
pen,
am.
or-
Multiple daily injections. I'm strongly considering jumping on a pump. I think I needed it to catch up to where I was at because I hate having stuff on my body. I don't even and again, I think this is also part of the when you're a kid, you got to carry a bag with your meter and with snacks in it and stuff. And I just hated feeling like a little pack mule as a kid. And then playing sports, and then I started performing by the time I was 16 or 17. And I hated having a thing on me, having to explain it, and even just physical thing on me. I always hated, but this stuff has gotten so much smaller and so much easier now that I was actually just talking to someone in Philadelphia that I bumped into with a pump on it. It was so small and just kind of easy that I was like, all right, I think it's time. I've spoken to my endo about it, so I'll probably get on a pump.
Don't feel too bad. It's also a Big Apple thing. A lot of you Big Applers do not enjoy the idea. Yeah, so I have a few friends, actually Bambi too, she's MDI, but most of them don't wear pumps because it's like I'm walking all the time. I'm always doing all this stuff. And it's like my friend Beth was like, what if something bumps me and rips it off? And I was like, oh, it's not gonna happen. But like at the same time, it seems like a very big New Yorker thing also to not have stuff on you. It's like,
Yeah.
join us. I feel
Is
like
it-
I'm part of a cult. Join us, join us, join us.
Man, 15, I guess, 16 years ago when I was like trying to get on a pump or my endo was trying to get me on one, I was like very against having things attached to me. I just didn't know at the time. I thought it was going to be more invasive. I also just had weird misinformation. I think I've shared this on the podcast before, but I had a friend, like one of the only people I knew with diabetes growing up had like a port surgically like implanted in them for their insulin pump. And I thought that they were all like that. So I was like, well, I don't want that. And my touch was like, no, where did you hear that? And so
I
like
do
now,
not
like
want your
seeing-
situation.
yeah, I did. I was like, I do not want that. But now even with like, so I have a 7-day wear infusion set now. So it's like, I only change my site once a week. And now I am a CGM. I'm much more comfortable with them. So I think it just depends on where you are. Everybody's different. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Your hypothesis about Big Apple, like New Yorkers being more.
I
Big
have a
Apple focused. I'm gonna have to
thought.
like dial that in. I'm gonna have to.
I
Just
have
research.
a thought. I have many a friend in New York who's like, no, thanks, I don't want to pump. But okay, so MDI, G6, I think we were leading into questioning of like, is this stuff accessible to you as a person who is a comedian and essentially an entrepreneur who's self-employed?
Yeah. A lot of my stuff is covered by my insurance, which is great. My endo visits are out of pocket and they're very expensive. So there's that. But that is the situation that works best for me, at least right now. And so yeah, so for me personally, it's all pretty accessible. Though the big frustrations are when, for instance, a company doesn't want, or my insurance doesn't want to cover like Dexcom anymore, or, because I'll do, if I'm not on the Dexcom for one reason or another, and I'm, testing my blood sugar with strips like Freestyle or whatever it is, and then my insurance decides they don't want to cover a certain type of test strips anymore. And so they go ahead and they change it for me as if they're doctors. I mean, it's unnerving. It's crazy. It's insane that can even happen. So that's like one of the biggest frustrations in my life, I think, is not being able to get a prescription that I have been getting for my whole life. And
I think that to me is one of the most frustrating things about the healthcare system. I mean, we could just blindfold ourselves and throw a dart at the wall and pick anything that are infuriating about it. But just like changing the formulary, like, because for some people, even though like, so for example, like Novolog, Humalog are basically the same thing, but some people like Novolog just won't work for them, just like because of the way their DNA is made up or whatever. And so when your insurance like makes you do that, then you got to go get a prior authorization and go through all this paperwork just to get the medicine you've been taking your entire life.
right. And your prior author or your doctor, they're not easy to reach. They have other I almost said clients, patients, but clients is fucking the right word too, because that's what it starts to feel like. It's impossible. And then, here's the thing. It's not like if you order a pair of Nikes and they come on Thursday instead of Monday, that's fine. You'll figure out something else to wear.
You probably have another pair of shoes.
You'll be all right. But when it's your medication, that's not okay. It's insane. It's insane.
It just seems like ridiculous barriers. And like when I think about your situation, like, okay, you have access to all this other stuff, but the thing that's most expensive is the endo visit. But every year, all three of us have to go to the endo at the beginning of the year to recertify that we have diabetes.
Just to reprove, sign on the dotted
Girl,
line that it hasn't been cured.
Make it make sense. I will fight any of these people in the street. But yeah, that's so frustrating. I can't believe that you have to go through that, and we all do. But
Yeah.
sorry that it's a barrier like that, because that really, really sucks.
You know what happens to me? And also, I should have the freedom to be lazy sometimes. It's my autonomy. But it always happens that, like, right before I'm about to leave to go on tour, or I'm about to be, like, in another city for some number of days, I, like, can't. I have to scramble to get all my prescriptions and stuff like that. It's like, it's the worst. It's the worst.
Make friends with your
and it's
pharmacist.
like-
Find a pharmacy where
That-
you can make friends with them, because they'll help you. So that's me.
Well, because I think too, like that has nothing to do with like diabetes care. And yet that's like so like immensely part of diabetes life. And like, it has nothing like, and no one else can help you. Like you have no representation. The pharmacist doesn't know who you are. Like the medical device company doesn't know who you are. The endo is unreachable because they have 19 other patients that they've got to see and check their diabetes off. It's tough, man. I think it's, that to me is like one of the more frustrating things about diabetes. It's not always just counting carbs and blood sugars. It's just all the other hurdles that you got to jump through just to be able to do your job.
Right. It's so many other things.
And it's minute stuff. Like I was just telling you about when we were complaining out earlier, like I was telling you about how I had that low or whatever. But like when you're low and then you have to like refill your cartridge, it's just like diabetes just adds up. It's just like this big pile, and it just lives in your life, and you just have to look at it and be like, I'm cool with you being here, even though you'd like to commit homicide. So It is what it is.
Right.
Well, Nick, I know we're kind of coming to time, and I wish I could stay on for the whole rest of the afternoon. But man, it's been such a pleasure and like breath of fresh air in the middle of the day, just chat with you and hang out with you for a bit. Where should we send people to find you? You're very online, but where do we want to send people from today's pod?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say, like, this was a blast. This was a great conversation. It's rare that I get to talk about these things with people. So on or off the podcast, I would love to do it again. I feel like barely reached the surface here of things we could have talked about. But yeah, so you can find me at Mr. Nick Callas on Instagram. No punctuation, just MRNICKCALLAS. And if you're diabetic, message me and say that you heard me here and ask me about my diabetes, and we'll talk about yours. And then come to a show. I'm touring a lot between now and the end of September. I'm shooting my first 1 hour special in Texas. So definitely some diabetics.
Oh, where in Texas?
We're in Dallas.
Not in Dallas, in Austin.
That's not too far.
Classic.
No, yeah. Are you in Dallas?
Both of us are.
Uh-huh.
You're both in Dallas.
Mhm.
Oh, no way.
We are diabesties. I don't think Rob likes that phrase, but we are diabesties.
I would wear a diabesties shirt or bracelet. So it's going to be at the Creek in the Cave in Austin, and it's shooting. There's a 7:00 show on September 29th and a 9:00 show, and there's a 7:00 and a 9:00 show on the 30th. So yeah, bring them out.
That's interesting. I'm going to just put this out there, and because it's going to be recorded, people will hear it and then have to hold me accountable to it. So I'm doing an event with JRF Austin in August, and I'm going to tell them about that. And we're going to bring a group of people to one or both of those shows. So that's,
get to Austin.
that's what I'm telling you from this.
That's amazing. I'll hold to it.
Oh, cool. Well, I agree, Nick. We barely scratched the surface. You are officially a friend of the pod. Would love to continue to, stay in touch. So this will not be the last time that we talk to you and do some things with you. So thank you for being a guest on the show. And, thanks for being open and vulnerable about your life with diabetes, for other people with diabetes. It's awesome and essential to what we do.
Truly my pleasure. And I'll drop my cell in the chat so you guys have it.
Thank you so much. For those of you